And welcome to CRM MVP Podcast, episode number 75. Wow, I can't believe that we're already at 75 episodes. I wonder what we should be planning for episode 100, right? I mean, before we know it, we'll be there. And I'm curious to hear what you guys think we should do for episode 100. But, in this episode, it's kind of interesting because I've been pretty much at home for the last couple of weeks with this whole coronavirus thing. Everyone is kind of working from home. I typically work from home anyway, but I do a bunch of stuff outside the house whenever I have a chance. And it seems like everything is closed these days. And, I just can't wait for life to kind of start again. I'm excited about getting back into the things that I was doing before. I'm excited about new beginnings in some cases, especially because this week, when I'm recording this episode, we're going through the MVP Summit, which happens every year. And I can see all these new things the Microsoft team is working on. And I can't wait to see those things out in the world, in the open, right? For everyone to enjoy and implement and take advantage of. So there's a lot of, I guess, motivation this week to think about new and beginnings. And that made me think about my beginning when it came to Dynamics 365. Now, I've said this story many times before. I've mentioned that I started as an administrator, right, installing CRM 3.0 for a company. And then, after that, after a few years, I made the switch to Pro. I started essentially being a technical lead and escalations for support for the partner that I was working for. And I did that for a couple of years. And my passion was always to become a solution architect, a functional consultant first. I wanted to be in front of the customer rather than just working with the IT department all the time, and then eventually make it into solution architect. So I would say that my real career within Dynamics 365, just because of what I do right now, started when I became a functional consultant. I would say that is when I started really, really enjoying what I did. And I wasn't complaining before when I was a technical, lead for the partner I was with. When I was a CRM administrator, I enjoy my job. I love, the people I used to work with, and they're still friends today. But, I really feel like I found my calling when I became a functional consultant, when I was actually creating solutions rather than troubleshooting solutions that were already in place. Because if you think about it, when I was a CRM administrator, I had a solution that I implemented, and obviously I didn't do a good job because I didn't know. I approached it as an IT person rather than as a business application that is what's supposed to be. So I had this solution, and my job was to essentially put up fires and to customize it based on what salespeople would ask for and things like that. I wasn't really creating things or solving business challenges. It was kind of reactive rather than proactive. And the same thing with a technical lead, job in escalation and support. I was doing a lot of, this is broken. This is not, Dynamics is not talking to my other server, or our firewall is preventing us from getting to it, whatever it was. And my job was to go in there and configure ADFS or configure, whatever it was technically challenging. That was my job, was to go in there and make it work. That was essentially what I did. And again, I enjoy that job, but it was very reactive. And when I became a functional consultant is when I think I made the transition into being proactive. So I was thinking this week about, what are some of the mistakes that I made when I started as a functional consultant, when I switched to being proactive. And by the way, I started working with CRM Online heavily when I made that transition. What are some of the things that I could have done better that perhaps would have made a difference into how my career has developed over time? And I think some of these things that I thought about, are things that I did, but I've noticed that other people, whether it is because I've worked with them and they get started as a functional consultant after either I was a functional consultant or I was a solution architect. There were people that They were even in projects with me. They worked for another company. They were in a project with me. They really loved Dynamics after working with it for a while, and they decided to, make a career and become a functional consultant. This was after I was a solution architect, things like that. And I saw them make some mistakes that fortunately I was able to kind of work around them. So I decided to put together a list of my top 10 mistakes brand new functional consultants make. However, I do think that some of these mistakes are across the board. So even if you're starting as a project manager or engagement manager, or even if you're starting as a developer, I think that some of these will be applicable to you, to anyone starting a career in Dynamics 365. And for that matter, even if you're starting a career within Power Apps or the Power Platform, or you're starting a career within SharePoint consulting, whatever it is, I think that some of these are applicable. Now, obviously, the examples I will be using are my own examples. I don't want to bring in perhaps other things that I've seen from other professionals out there, although we'll see where that goes. As you know, I don't script these episodes. I just hit record and speak for an hour or whatever it is. So, we'll see what happens. But, a lot of the stories that you will hear, if any, will be from my own experience and the things that I did, whether I did them well or I didn't do them so well, and I learned a lesson from it. Remember, in Dynamics, in a lot of cases, you either win or you learn. You'd rarely completely lose and mess something up. Now, yeah, I've been in projects where the customer was so upset that they fire us, essentially, and they said they don't want to continue implementing Dynamics. I've been in projects like that. Not every project has been a success. And unfortunately, some of those projects that were kind of a failure where early in my career, and they were, discouraging. They made me question whether this was for me or not. And I think that a lot of people starting as a functional consultant have been there or are there right now, where they're questioning whether they made the right choice. So once again, this episode is to talk about the things that I've gone through, the things that I've done in the past that I hope none of you have to go through it. If you're listening to this and you already have been a functional consultant for years, perhaps there's not going to be a lot of value for you. Perhaps you can listen to it and kind of agree or disagree with my top 10. And I hope that if you're a solution architect, if you've been in this profession for a while, if you're an MVP listening to this, you can chime in with your own list. And again, these are the first 10 things that came to mind when it came to mistakes that most brand new professionals make when it comes to working with Dynamics 365. But I know that there are some other ones out there, and the ones that you will comment, the ones that you will add to the list will be because they happen to you or they happen to someone that you work with. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what you come up with. So without any further ado, let's go with number one on the list. When I started working as a functional consultant, I came from being a global technical lead for a partner. That's for that partner, and on that job is when I started traveling. I remember my first trip overseas was to Colombia, and then I went to Netherlands, and I started essentially going places to implement Dynamics 365. I think it was 2008, maybe something like that. I don't remember exactly. It was a long time ago, 12 years ago, if it was 2008 when I started going. And the first thing that I remember when I started my job as a functional consultant after being this global technical lead guy was that I never wanted to ask anyone for help. Every time I got stuck somewhere, my idea was I need to figure this out. And the idea behind it is that I knew that if I figure it out, even if it took me 2 days to figure something out that I could have learned in 10 minutes from one of our solution architects or something like that, I think that if it took me 2 days, I will never forget it. Not only the thing that I was trying to figure out, not only the whatever it is. Let's say I was trying to create a workflow. I just throw something out there. I know that if it took me 2 days until ultimately I figure out what was the workflow that I needed to do, I know that I was going to remember that. But I was also going to remember the things that I tried that didn't work, or if I try them and they produce different results. I knew that whenever I found myself needing those other different results, I knew how to do them too, because I messed up trying to learn the previous one, right? But, one of the things that I think about is how much more I could have learned if I wasn't so, I guess, concerned about what other people may think because I was asking for help. Again, I was hired coming as a very, I guess, knowledgeable professional when it came to dynamics, and I was in terms of how everything works behind the scenes. But then when it came to creating, remember, this was my first job when I had to actually engineer something from scratch rather than troubleshooting something that was done already by someone else. When it came to engineering things and creating things, I struggle. I didn't know how to do in some things. There might be 3 or 4 different ways to do something, and I didn't know which one to go for. And instead of asking for help, I just took it upon myself to figure things out. I think that there are some, I don't know if we call it concerns, or there are some hesitation when you start a new position where you feel like you're not being an asset to the team. Like, I know it happened to me. It happened to me in every job that I got since I graduated college. Fortunately, I didn't have to work when I went to college. My dad was very much against me focusing on anything that it was in college and sports, essentially. So I didn't have to work while I went to college, other than, side jobs doing computer installations of Windows and things like that. But, once I graduated college, I started my own company. I started working, and every time I've worked for anyone or even for myself, there's always that hesitation of being a valuable asset to the team. And I think this mindset maybe comes from sports too. Every time I've played any sport, I want to be an asset to the team, or else, what am I doing? I'm wasting just everyone's time if I'm not doing that. So when I started as a functional consultant, my whole idea was I need to be an asset to the team. And if I'm just sitting here asking questions all day, not only I'm not being an asset because I'm not creating stuff, I'm not doing work, I'm just asking people to help me do my job. But number 2, I'm distracting others from doing their job. So it's actually worse. So that was my mindset. But now that I've been running my own company, essentially my own practice since 2014, so it's been almost 6 years now, I realize that if I had a functional consultant in my company that is spending 2 days trying to figure something that I can explain in 10 minutes, that is bad for us, for the company, and for the client ultimately. Whether you charge by the hour for those 2 days that it took you to do something or not, whether it's free, it doesn't really matter. The money is not even a question here. It's all about, being a good asset for your customer as well. So I feel like, now that I'm on this side, I feel that that was a mistake that I made tremendously and a disservice to the companies that I worked for in the past, where I was too stubborn to ask for help, and I was just mainly about, I need to figure this out for myself. Now, it helped me tremendously on learning dynamics, learning how to customize it, learning how to do anything. Essentially, within a few months, I rarely had to go and even research stuff. Because remember, when I started working with Dynamics CRM, it was in the first it was in the 3 days, then in the 4 days when I was a technical lead. When I started working as a functional consultant, we were right on the edge of CRM 2011. So I think I did a couple of implementations in 4.0, and then everything else was 2011 after that. So CRM 2011 it wasn't very broad. You could be an expert on all that it did. You knew kind of everything that was possible inside of the application because it wasn't as big as it is today. And there's more to come on this on the list. Actually, number 2 on the list, we'll dig in a little bit more into what's the problem with today's dynamics, right, compared to back in the day when I started. But when I started, you could be an expert on all of it. You could pretty much know everything Dynamics does from beginning to end if you work with it day in and day out the way I did and the way many people did. I'm not saying I'm special. A lot of us were working on this thing day in and day out. So because of that, a few months later, after researching everything, I rarely had to go and find out how something worked because I knew it all kind of in CRM 2011, and then 2013 came out, and things started to grow at that point. But again, in today's world now, seeing it from a leadership position, I hope that anyone who works with me, if they don't know how to do something, they should ask for help. I think that that's the best way to do it. I don't think it looks weak at all. I ask for help all the time, by the way, today, because the system is so big, and all of the MVPs listening to this know, because we have back channels and ways to communicate, that I'm constantly asking people, how do you do this? How do you do that? Has anybody done this before? Can you explain to me how to do that? Right now I have a huge block, I guess, mental block on how to get something done with flow, because I am not a flow expert, and I have a question out there for MVPs to try to help me out figure something out, rather than me struggling with this thing for 2 weeks trying to make it work. So I am a huge believer in asking for help now, something I didn't do at the beginning, and I wish I did. I think I would have learned faster. I think that I would have saved customers time, although I never really heard any complaints from customers, so it's not like I can say, yeah, there were these 2 projects where we could have delivered on time and we went overtime. No, that wasn't the case. We always got it done, but I wish I would have done a better job asking for help. So that was number 1 on the list. Number 2 is being too broad in today's dynamics. Like I mentioned, back in the day, you could pretty much know everything Dynamics CRM 2011 did from beginning to end. You could be an expert in everything. You knew how customer service worked or cases worked. You knew how to do sales, marketing, which hasn't really changed since 2011. So you kind of knew everything in the application settings, everything. Back in the day, it wasn't integrating with Exchange. It wasn't integrating with SharePoint. It was, there were so many things missing. We didn't have dialogues. We didn't have real-time workflows. We didn't have actions. We only had background workflows, regular workflows. We didn't have access teams. We didn't have there were so many things that we have today that we didn't have back in the day, that you could know everything. But today the application is so huge that you can be an expert on one thing. Like you can be an expert on connected field service, for example. And that's it. That's all you do for a living, is be a functional consultant in connected field service or sales or whatever, customer service, you name it. You can be an expert in one thing. And I think one mistake functional consultants make today, and I've seen this from people that I've worked with in the past, people that have joined my team, people that, I've seen in other companies that I've mentored, for example, before. They work for other partners and say, oh, yeah, I'm a functional consultant at such and such partner, and I'm trying to do everything. When you try to do everything in today's dynamics, first of all, I don't think there's anyone out there that knows everything Dynamics can do anymore. Those days are over. You can't do it. Like by the time you finish learning every single feature in Dynamics, like once you count all of the first-party applications, I'm not even talking about Power Apps, like model-driven apps, getting out of Canvas app, like Power BI, like there's so much stuff out there that is impossible to learn at all. So I think one mistake that people make today, functional consultants, people starting, whether that's functional consultant developers or whatever it is that they try to learn all of it. They try to learn too much at once. And I think that you should try to kind of laser focus on something. Let's say if you're a functional consultant, you're being put in projects, I would try to be kind of on the same projects, right? Maybe manufacturing project, maybe financial services projects, maybe professional services projects, things that are always kind of constant so you can get really good at them, just like you used to be really good at all of Dynamics when it was small. So I think being too broad can be an issue. You will be a master of none kind of thing, and I think that you need to try to focus on one thing. Now, you can learn everything there is to learn about, let's say, the sales app, and once you're really good at it and you understand how everything works and the product catalog and goals and everything, maybe you can then move to customer service and start learning that and just focus on that. But just don't try to learn them all at once, like all the applications at once. Just pick one, focus on that, get really good at it, then the next one, and so on and so forth. All right, number 3 is not learning any new stuff. And this is something that I'm guilty of. When I started, I just didn't have time to learn about new features and new things coming down the pipeline. Now, back in the day when I got started, it was a lot easier. It was like one release a year, and Microsoft kind of advertised that it was going to be 2 releases a year, but it was typically just one. Like, there were some problems back in the day. They're way better now. Obviously, those problems are no longer there. There's 2 releases, and we know exactly when they're coming, and the team is just great today. It's easy to know what's happening. But back in the day, when things came out, it was kind of a lottery. It wasn't always exactly known when it was going to happen, and I just didn't have time to learn new stuff. At least be proactive about learning new stuff. It was kind of like, oh, okay, I guess now this is available. Okay, I guess, access teams are available, or the social pane is now available in new forms, or whatever it is. It was kind of like whenever it came out, I would react to it. I would learn it really quick, or I would try to implement it in a project, realize that it worked in a way or it didn't work in a way. It was kind of like very reactive rather than being proactive. So I think that's a mistake most people make, most functional consultants make, because I made it. And, we will talk a little bit about work and life balance later on, but I think that, one of the excuses that I had, and one of the excuses that most, I think, functional consultants have and other professionals have starting on this stuff is that, look, I don't have time to learn any new stuff. The problem is that if you don't learn any new stuff, you are not as good as you could be. You're not the best functional consultant or whatever you could be. You need to learn new things. And again, we will talk a little bit more about that. But the other side of learning new stuff is that it can prepare you for things that are coming up in the future. So for example, if you're working on a project or in features that will be perhaps discontinued on the next release, something that Microsoft made public, and they said, hey, look, the whatever feature is going away, and let's say the previous UI, just to pick something right now that we're talking about it in March of 2020. Microsoft announced that the classic UI, now called the web client, is going away in October of 2020. They announced that. If you're not paying attention to that stuff, you could literally spend months working on customizing the previous UI, and then right before you go live, or when you go live on September 1st, that thing goes away and everything is broken. So you cannot be an effective functional consultant or solution architect if you're not learning any new stuff. Now, you can sit back and say, look, I'm a functional consultant. I don't have to pay attention to that. The solution architect should pay attention. If they're asking me to do it on the previous UI and then it breaks, it's not my fault. No, you should try to be the best you can be. And I think that being part of being an effective functional consultant is to, learn from some of the habits and some of the things that solution architects make, if that's where you want to go. Because there are several paths inside of Dynamics 365 that you can take. I think that a lot of people that start as a functional consultant could go in a few different, directions, and we will talk a little bit more about that later in the episode. All right, let's talk about number 4. Doing stuff without understanding the why. This happened to me a lot, starting. I would just blindly do customizations. I remember doing this also on my previous job. Like, before I was a functional consultant, I was a technical lead and I worked with solution architects. And when something didn't work, something broke, I would just be told what to do to fix it. Like, oh, just go and do this, and that's how you fix it. Okay, cool. And I never really bothered to learn why, like, I needed to do that, or understanding why it broke on the first place. I would just do it. And I think that a lot of functional consultants are like that. I work with plenty of functional consultants that would just do whatever I say, and they don't really understand why, or at least I don't think they understand why. They're just doing it because I'm asking for it. Now, that's great from a solution architect perspective, right? Me explaining to you why I'm making the decision to use, I don't know, business units in this case rather than whatever. That takes time, and I don't have to be explaining that. But the bottom line is, if you're brand new and you want to learn new things, and you want to learn more and be more effective, understanding why you're doing things is very important. And by the way, this doesn't only apply to things that you hear from solution architects, or things that are in a functional design document, or a punch list of fields that you need to add, or whatever. this also applies to best practices that you learn out there, whether they come from Microsoft or other experts, even me, whoever, right? You learn a best practice out there and you just follow it blindly without understanding the why. You shouldn't do that, right? If you hear a best practice out there, and we will talk about some best practices in a second, but if you hear a best practice and you just follow it without really understanding why, you could actually get into trouble. And I talk about this, for example, in episode 20 of the show, CRM MVP podcast episode 20, I talk about 20 industry best practices I don't follow or I disagree with, right? And that's because when I try to understand the why, it didn't make any sense to me that we were following those best practices. So because of that, apply your brain, essentially, apply your reasoning, your logic to it. And we talked about this on an episode called Fact-Based Consulting, which was released a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago now, if you want to go back and listen to that. But, fact-based consulting is all about, what works and why, understanding the why. So whether it is something you're doing on a project or whether it is a best practice or whether, you see, for example, in a project, sometimes a customer will ask for something and the solution architect or the partner that you work for will say, okay, we'll do that in another phase. And you're like, well, why? If you don't understand, you should ask why. I think understanding the why is super important. And I think this is also connected to another, best practice in this case, which is not raising red flags. I was the worst at that, right? I was a functional consultant. I would hear somebody say something and I didn't say anything because that wasn't my project, right? I wasn't the solution architect. It's not my responsibility to bring those up. But one thing that is important to know is that solution architects don't know everything. There are some situations where because you'll be learning new things, because you're not being too broad, because you've asked for help to other people or whatever, you follow some of the things on the list already, you may know some things that other solution architects don't know. I mean, it's happening to me in projects when I work with other solution architects and they say, I think we should use this functionality for it. And now I have an advantage as an MVP that, I kind of have to stay on top of new things. Like that's what we do as MVPs. So I bring it up and say, I wouldn't do that because Microsoft announced they're going to get rid of it or whatever it is. If I didn't bring that up just because that wasn't my area within the project or my responsibility, then that would be doing a disservice on the project. So again, raising red flags because you don't understand why you're doing something should be part of what you do. Now, don't do it in front of the customer in the middle of a meeting or if you're having an iteration call or something and you say like, hey, actually, Joe, that's not going to work. Like, no, don't do it like that. Do it, be professional, pull the solution architect to the side. I've done it a bunch of times where if we're doing a call and I'm not leading it and the solution architect promises something that I know is not going to work or it's not going to happen or whatever it is, right after the call, I say, hey, can you stay on the call for a second? And then I will explain what it is. And then an email is sent out or in the next call or whatever. And the solution architect says, actually, I was thinking I was going to do this, but after meeting with the team or after meeting with Gus or whatever, we realized that there's some limitations that won't allow it to do it that way. But here's an alternate solution. There's typically an alternate solution to it. And I think the customers will respect that, will know that, okay, we thought we were going to do this. It's not working. But here's the other option for it. I mean, that is an honest mistake, and I think that, you should not shy away from raising red flags or from following things without understanding why, whether that is, again, coming from whoever. Even with a person with authority, you should be able to question and, try to understand the why. All right, number 5, and this one, it's kind of related to not understanding the why, but is customizing for functionality rather than performance. All right, that is a mistake that a lot of even solution architects make, functional consultants make all the time. You get a list of 500 fields you need to add into an entity. You don't question it, you just add 500 fields. Well, if you add 500 fields with a bunch of business rules and a bunch of real-time workflows and scripts and stuff like that, the solution will have the 500 fields that you were asked to do. So yeah, high five, you did it, but they will be so slow that no one will use it. So it's still a failure. So I think that understanding the why is connected to this one. It is important that a solution performs so that, to a level that the users will be able to use it. It doesn't matter if you, as a solution architect, design a solution that will win awards, from Microsoft for innovation. If it's so slow and so complicated, then no one wants to use it. We want to create solutions that are fast performing and that are easy to use, and they can still satisfy business challenges and business requirements. So always try to think about whether what you're doing, for example, adding 200 security roles because someone asked you to do it, whether that will disrupt performance. If you're creating a bunch of real-time workflows that will run when a record is created, you know that those real-time workflows will have to finish before the record is actually displayed to the user. So if you're adding 10 real-time workflows, maybe you can step back and be like, hey, look, I understand why we need these processes. That's not the question. It's not the why. But shouldn't we be concerned that this thing is going to be super slow, or that it's going to take 20 seconds to load a record every time a user does this? Should that be a concern? Just raise that up. So don't just blindly customize for functionality instead of performance. So that is rule number 5. All right, so we're halfway through this thing. Let's go. Rule number 6. This one is a mistake that I made when I started working with Dynamics, maybe connected to the fact that I didn't understand the why. But the mistake is customizing the default solution, right? Customizing, just going into settings, customization, customize the system, and then you end up in the default solution. As you know, the default solution contains all of the components and customizations from all of the solutions in the environment. So all of the solutions that you put in there, manage, unmanage, whatever it is, all of them are all shown within the default solution. So when you customize that solution, number one, it's very, very hard to export anything, especially because once you start adding managed stuff to it, which shows up in default solutions, and you try to export it, you're not going to get all of the functionality out. You're going to start getting errors for dependencies and things like that. So, you don't want to customize the default solution. The other thing is that that every solution in Dynamics has a publisher, and the publisher has a prefix associated to it. And the prefix for the default solution is new underscore whatever. That is the prefix, right? So when you add something, it will always have that new underscore, and we'll never know where it came from, what solution, who was the publisher, who did this, right? It was always made, it will always just start with new, and you will never know what's going on. So it is difficult to locate or identify any customizations that you have made in any environment through the default solution. So because of that, we always want to create solutions, attach ourselves as the publishers, and then customize the system through it. Now you can, add a bunch of different customizations, existing customizations into your brand new solution. Let's say the account entity with all of the dependencies or all of the assets as they're known, the contact entity, the opportunity, whatever it is. And then you add all your fields and your views and your things to it, but at least it will have your prefix, and we will know exactly who added it based on that. If you're working on a big team, typically, and this doesn't happen in every partner, but typically every functional consultant or developer or whatnot will have their own solution, so we know exactly who added what fields were added. It's a lot easy to, kind of understand, audit who has been doing the work and what happened there if there's anything. There are tools, for example, like the document generator from the XRM toolbox that can take a solution and export the schema and tells you here are all of the different fields and things and assets that were created or were included as part of the solution. So it's always important to have a solution, instead of customizing the default solution directly. For the reasons that I've mentioned. So there are several reasons of why you shouldn't do that. And in a lot of cases, again, people just don't understand them or don't care, and they just customize the default solution. And in a lot of cases, they do it without taking a backup of the default solution or a backup of the system before they start changing stuff. I did that, many, many times in the past. Thankfully, it never was an issue. I would just go into the system and be like, oh, all I have to create is a simple workflow, or I have to modify this thing. And I would go ahead and just do it directly without taking a backup. And that was a problem. Again, this is pre-sandbox environments and all the stuff that we have today that make it a lot easier, where I can do copies and stuff like that. Back in the day, you only had a production environment and that was it. If you wanted a sandbox environment, you had to kind of pay for another environment, another whole tenant, because Microsoft didn't have them. So please just don't customize the default solution. And this also applies to CRM administrators as well. Number 7 on the list is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people start with the functional consultant title. Or a junior consultant. Sometimes it's the same thing. You're starting as a junior consultant, and the ability to go in different directions opens up at that point. And what I mean by that is that once you get started in Dynamics 365, there are several places where you can go to. You can, become a solution architect eventually. And depending on the partner, this changes, right? You may start as a junior consultant, then make it to consultant, then make it to senior consultant, then make it to junior solution architect. Like, some partners will have all these different titles in between to kind of ensure it's kind of like the belt system from karate or whatever. You're moving up the ranks, and then eventually you will make it to black belt if that's where you want to go. But the other thing that people don't think about is the fact that solution architect, even though is the way I did it, doesn't have to always be the way to do it. You can become a technical architect. You can become an engagement manager. You can become a salesperson if you want. You can even be a solution architect that only does sales. They're called pre-sale solution architects. So there are several paths that you can go to. So I think number 7 is not following your real passion. There was a guy that I trained as a functional consultant back, I guess, 2 partners ago or 3 partners ago. I don't remember anymore. I have been a consultant for a long time there, and he was hired because we were growing, and they said, okay, you have to work, job shadow Gus. Essentially, he's going to be your mentor. He's going to teach you everything, and go for it, right? And he started, and I noticed immediately, like, one of the things with functional consultants and CRM consultants is that in a lot of cases you're interacting directly with the stakeholders, with the users, the super users, the managers, the people that will actually be using the actual solution that you're implementing. So one of the things that I noticed with him is that he was pretty shy when he came to speaking, in public and demonstrating, for example, the work that was done or something like that. He would prefer not to do it. I think that he went to college and became a developer, and then he got an internship in this CRM partner, and then the partner was like, yeah, you can just start as a functional consultant. But after talking to him, it was clear that he wanted to be a developer. He wanted to be a technical person, speak to as little people as possible, and just create amazing solutions. And once I realized that, then I talked to my boss, and I was like, hey, look, I think this guy is better to go into the development side. And they started putting him on projects where he was in charge of data integrations or integrating to other applications. He started being in charge of UI customizations. He started being in charge of developing custom plugins and custom workflow steps. Little by little, he started building his confidence as a technical resource, essentially, and they made the transition. He went from functional consultant to technical consultant, which is essentially a developer, a fancy title for a developer that a lot of partners use. And then from there, he became a senior technical consultant and then a technical architect. And he's doing very, very well as a developer, as a technical person. He's an amazing developer for Dynamics 365 still today. That's his passion, and he's awesome at it. So I think that, I've seen this before where people start as functional consultants that should clearly be doing something else. They focus too much on becoming a solution architect, which is kind of the progression. If you're a functional consultant, you want to become a solution architect later on. For a lot of people, at least for me, that was the case. But you perhaps do do it better if you were an engagement manager, right? Kind of a project manager. You can do that, and you can be a functional consultant for a year and then still make a transition into project management. You could be better at, maybe you love doing the demos, but not so much doing the actual work. In other words, adding 1,000 fields. You don't need to add 1,000 fields into a solution to demo it. Maybe you have to add, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 fields to be able to show the solution. You love that. You're a performer. You like to, kind of show the potential of what the solution may look like. Well, you could become a pre-sales consultant or a pre-sales solution architect, right? So, they have different titles depending on different companies, sales solution specialist or whatever. They'll have different titles like that, but they all do the same. So I think that one mistake that a lot of consultants make is that they don't follow their real passion. If you want to be a developer, raise your hand and say, hey, look, I'm digging this functional consulting. I'm learning a lot, but what I really want to do is write code. Like, can you put me in projects like that? And perhaps your title won't change immediately. It won't change from functional consultant to developer or whatever, equivalent title it is. It might not change right away, but it will change eventually if that's really your passion and if you're really good at it. I've seen people do it with, SQL stuff. Like they did a lot of SQL stuff in the past, and now they're a functional consultant, so they're doing all this CDS dynamic stuff, and they really want to be working with data. So they keep asking to be put on projects where there's a lot of data work and data integrations and Power BI and stuff like that. And next thing you know, that's all they do. They're a BI specialist or they're a data specialist, data scientist type of person. So once again, follow your real passion. Life's too short to, follow kind of what everybody else is doing. Forget it. Just everybody else is being everybody else, you be you. So number 8, work and life balance. So this is another one that I struggle with, maybe because when I became a functional consultant, I had just finished, I don't want to say a toxic relationship, because it was kind of like, it was the way it worked over there. Everybody worked hard. Is one of those stories where you hear like a startup where like the owners or whatever are working 20 hours a day, etc. That was kind of how it was there. Everyone was working hard, and because of that, I was part of the group. I was the one working hard, and it was in one of those companies where, I got, as I mentioned, my taste of, travel, and also my taste of, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And before I could answer, they would interrupt me and be like, you're flying to whatever, right? So they would just send me places or whatever it was, and that was just the way it was. Working hard, working into the night, that was just the way it was at the company. And, it's not that I liked it or disliked it. It was just the way everybody did. So when I went to the next partner, I became a functional consultant. Everyone worked 9 to 5 pretty much. And some people work late, a little bit later to catch up or whatever it was. But it wasn't expected that you work till like 9 p.m. every day, the way it was at the previous company. So because of that, because of my inability to keep like a work-life balance, just because I've been working, insane hours for the previous 2 years, and even the years before that, when I was a full-time trainer, I was the guy doing the 9 to 5 class plus signing for doubles and teaching the nighttime classes. So I'm always like that. I actually do it now as well. I don't think it's for everyone. I really, really enjoy what I do, and I can do this thing like 20 hours a day, not because I have to, but because I love it. But I don't think everyone needs to do that. I think that you should, think about your work-life balance. You cannot force creativity. Literally, you cannot just stay up for 3 days and be creative. It doesn't work like that. And I think that there's a big part of being a good solution architect and a good functional consultant that your mind is in the game, that you're creative, that you're rested, that you're good to go. So I think that you need to spend a lot of time thinking about what is too much or too little. There's some people that their mind is not into it, even if they do it 3 hours a day. If that is the case, if the job that you're doing is just too boring or you're not into it, it's just a paycheck, try to find your real passion. Look at number 7 on the list. Try to find something that motivates you. For me, I love what I do, so I can do this thing all day. But, keeping a work-life balance is very, very important. It's something that I fail at the beginning. I eventually I settled on a 9 to 5 thing. I was able to unplug, but now I'm back at it. So learn from my mistake, I guess. All right, we're getting to the end of the list here. Number 9 is not getting involved with the community. This is something that I didn't do when I get started. I only started getting involved with the community around 2011, 2012, when I had been a functional consultant for a few years at that point. And I think that I missed out in a lot of learning, a lot of great experiences, a lot of networking with other professionals because I was just not interested I didn't even know about the community. So now I think that there's a lot more visibility, a lot more clarity into what the community is and how to get engaged with it. So don't make the same mistake of not getting involved. I think that there's a lot of focus these days on trying to understand, what are the activities that make you money. And if that activity doesn't make you money, and you cannot prove immediately that it will make you money, then you don't do it. I think that's a big mistake. There's a lot of things that I've done in my career, a lot of conferences, a lot of sessions that I've gone to that I went to it because I knew I wanted to be involved with the community. And in some cases, it became projects and work and other things that I did. So it paid off. But in other cases, it didn't. And I learned something from them. I've always credited the actual community when I got involved with helping me get my MVP award. And when I started with the community, I was selfish. I just wanted to learn more about Dynamics CRM, and I knew that the projects that I was working on weren't going to be enough. So I needed to go to the community and read about the problems and challenges that other people were having. And literally, you will find questions in there like, hey, here's the problem my company's having. What do you think is the best way to solve it? Like that. And because of that, I wanted to have as many of those situations as possible because I wanted to learn from all of them. And because of that, I got involved with the community. It was just a selfish thing, me wanting to learn more about Dynamics that was available to me at work. So I got involved in it, and I'm way better because of it. So not getting involved with the community is a mistake that a lot of people make when they're starting with Dynamics 365. Get involved, get to sessions, attend webinars, even if you don't think it's going to help you. I think that, again, in Dynamics and in this life kind of thing, you either win, you either go to a session and, wow, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I went to this event or whatever it was. I'm glad I answer this question, or you will learn from it. You either win or you learn, right? You went to a session about AI because you thought it was going to be cool, or about HoloLens, about IoT, and then you realize that, wow, I don't want to do that ever. Well, now you learn. It happened to me with Cisco back in the day. Before I started doing Dynamics, I thought I was going to do Cisco. Why? Because I played rugby, and the guys in the rugby team with the best cars were Cisco guys. And I'm like, well, if these guys are driving around awesome cars and have all this money, maybe I should also do Cisco. And then I took my CCNA class, and I passed the test. I got my CCNA certification, and I realized I never want to work with Cisco ever because it was super boring. But the people that love it make a lot of money with Cisco. So, it's one of those things where you kind of need to try it to find out if you like it or not. So I'm so happy that I didn't like Cisco because I don't know where I would be. Maybe I would be better off. Who knows? But I just didn't like it at all. And Cisco is a great company, by the way. I got nothing against it. But, man, all that routing just took a lot of me. All right, number 10, and we are getting to the end of the list. This one is another one that I haven't struggled with personally, but I know a lot of people that do. I talk to a lot of people, even MVPs today, that are working for other partners, other professionals out there, other people that seek me at conferences, because we have recorded several episodes about going on your own and, becoming an independent professional, independent consultant. And, this is something that I'm very passionate about. I really had a good conversation with Steve Mordew, another CRM MVP, about this. And this is one mistake that a lot of brand new professionals make. And I'm not saying brand new like you got your job last week. I'm saying you've been on the profession for a year or 2 years. perhaps even you came from doing that job with another platform. Maybe you were like a Salesforce guy, or you were, Siebel, whatever, and then you end up now with Dynamics. You're like, I've been doing this for a little bit, and I think I'm ready. I think I'm being exploited here. And I think if I had to put a name on this last one, would be doing the wrong math, right? Doing the wrong math comes from, maybe you're working, especially if you're working insane hours the way I used to. Well, I'm still kind of doing, and you're saying like, well, I'm working, let's just say 50 hours a week. I'm working 50 hours a week, and my employer is charging, I don't know, let's say $100 an hour, just to exaggerate, right? $100 an hour, 50 hours a week. They're making $5,000, and I'm making, I don't know, $2,000 or $1,500 or whatever it is. Like, that's not cool. Like, I'm going to go ask for a raise. That's not how it works, all right? The math doesn't work like that. It's not as simple as I'm working 50 hours and they're making $5,000. It doesn't work like that at all, okay? There's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. There's a lot of, in order for you to work those 50 hours into that $1 million contract your partner got, they had to spend hundreds and hundreds of days worth of hours to get that job. They had to pay a ton of people in order to gain the skills, to build the demos, to bid for the work, to find those leads, which is not easy to just find leads. Leads you can just go to Google and be like, hey, can you give me some leads for Dynamics? And just immediately here's the contract and sign it. It's not easy to do that, all right? So I think that a lot of people in the business that are brand new or that are new-ish do the math wrong, and they say, look, if I'm making the company X amount of money, I should be getting paid X. And I've seen it before. I've seen horrible examples of this, whether it is in my company or whether it is in companies that I've worked in the past, where people will say like, like I estimate I make this company $200,000 a year just by myself, and I'm only getting paid 80. Like, no, I'm going to go and ask for a raise to 160. Like, it doesn't work like that. The math doesn't work like that. I mean, I think we can do a whole episode about the intricacies of running a practice and running a company, because some of these companies do more than CRM, and you will see that it's not that simple. Now, am I going to stand here and be like, oh, the company's barely making it through after they pay your salary? No. In some companies, obviously, they make a good margin on your salary, right? On whatever you're doing, and that's good. If the way I see it is, if I'm getting paid, let's just say $30 an hour to do something, just on average, and the company's it's somehow found a way to make $300 an hour, I don't see it as I'm being exploited. I see it as, wow, like they found someone to pay them $300 for it. Like I don't even think about it in a negative way. But again, that's just me. I think that when you make the wrong math, you start getting disenchanted. You start getting, losing interest on your job and thinking more about the numbers, whereas you should be just focus on being the best solution architect or the best functional consultant you can be. And if you can do that, I think that the money will come later on, or it will come eventually. I never really, with every job, and I'm not, I guess I'm just being selfish here. I don't ever think that I work for a company where I was, getting overpaid. That I was making too much money for what I did, although I did have an experience in one of the partners, and this was years and years ago, where my boss, a guy that we hired recently, or that the company hired recently to take over the department, who came from a big partner that outsourced everything, told me to my face that, like, oh, you're making too much money because I could have some Indians or Russians, do your job for a fraction or something like that. And I was pretty interesting that they told me that to my face. But Anyway, that, people like that are out there in the world. I can record episodes worth of stories like that, of stuff that happened to me in the past, and I'm sure stuff like that has happened to you in the past as well. But again, don't fall in that trap of doing the wrong math. Like, I've talked to professionals out there that they come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about going professional or going on my own, starting my own company, and I'm making this much. Sometimes they tell me how much they're making. I never ask, but and I'm like, man, like that is a big a big decision, because you have a pretty good situation happening based on your position, based on your experience, based on the market, based on whatever. Now, as a company owner and as a practice lead, essentially, I can see what the market looks like and what people are paying for, and I have very visibility with that. And in some cases, yeah, I hear people. It happened to me with a really close friend of mine who's not an MVP, that told me how much money he was making, and I look at all his experience and all of that, and I'm like, dude, like you are getting underpaid for real. And he got another job at another company, and he's loving life now. He's making like double, which is the company, the market, salary, essentially the market value for someone with his skills. So, don't fall in that trap. Just focus on being the best functional consultant you can be, the best solution architect, the best engagement manager, project manager, salesperson, developer, technical architect, whatever you do, focus on being the best. Wake up every day trying to figure out what you need to do to become better at what you do more, and do more of that, and then everything else just works out. So I hope that you're staying home, you're staying safe, healthy. If you're listening to this when it comes out, the whole coronavirus thing is still happening. If you're listening to this in the future, I don't know what that looks like. But thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully it helps you out. Even if you've been doing this for a while, you get to learn some from it and maybe add some of your best practices and lessons essentially to the list, because a lot of people are starting in this industry and I don't want them to make the same mistakes I made. Hopefully they make it better, they make it bigger than me. I want to learn from you. I want to be inspired by you. And, if you have any questions, obviously, you can reach us at info@crmmvppodcast.com. All of our episodes are at crmmvppodcast.com. Follow me at Gus Gonzalez 2. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Leave us comments on the website. And we'll see you on the next one.